welcome parents, members of the Littleton community, faculty, staff. On behalf of the Administrative Council in the Littleton Public Schools, I'm very, very pleased that you are here today, and we have been most fortunate this year to have had the opportunity to have Charity Bell be a very, very important professional development resource for our faculty and staff. We're lucky to be in a district that is small enough where all of the administrators can sit together at one table and talk to each other. And when we were planning last spring, when we were planning the professional development and our opening day keynote, we were thinking of themes and presenters that would help us as we began to explore a more explicit focus on strategies and support for students' social and emotional learning. And at that point, Natalie Croteau, who is the co-chair of our district's wellness community, had just recently attended a presentation by Charity, and she recommended that we take a look at some of the presentations. And so Charity began our year. Our year began with a keynote presentation. And then we've had 2 follow-up presentations with faculty. Whether they're presentations to faculty or to parents, there are certain consistent themes that emerge, and those themes reflect her organization, Relentless Positivity, the themes of care and compassion and communication in your interrelationships between students, adults, and families. I'll use another word that starts with C, and that's collaboration. Bringing Charity here tonight for a parent presentation was very much a collaborative effort, and we would like to thank the co-chairs of the Wellness Committee, Natalie Croteau and Meredith Perry, as well as the members of our district's Wellness Committee for their support for this presentation. And we'd also like to thank Justine Muir, Director of Pupil Services, and the members of CPAC, the Special Education Parent Advisory Committee, for their support of this presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Charity to begin her presentation.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Am I on? Good? All right. Let me know if you can't. Thank you for being here. I am a parent. I have 2 of those things. And I know that this is really complex getting to something like this. And it's so easy to be like, I just want to go home. So I appreciate you being here. My name is Charity Bell. Among other things, I'm the Director of Training of the Department of Mental Health in Massachusetts for the Northeast. And I do run an organization called Relentless Positivity. I've been working in the fields of human interactions for the past 20 years or so. I'm fascinated by the way humans interact with one another, and I'm especially fascinated by the way we interact with people who have less power than us, and yet somehow manage to destabilize us in such an incredible way. I have been a foster parent for 20 years. We've had about 150 kids in our home over that time. And I have been thinking a lot about parenting in this time, and so I was delighted to have an opportunity to come and talk to you a little bit about it. I think we've got this parenting gig nailed. Said no parent ever. You know who actually thinks they're really good at parenting? People with no children. I always say that before I had kids, I was an amazing parent, earth-shatteringly good. And now I kind of walk around, and when people like make judgments, I want to give them my card so they can call me in 10 years when their kid is 9 and apologize. Like, I would just want to look and be like, just FYI, like at some point you're going to be like, wow, that lady that I kind of said, wow, she should control her kid, I should call her and apologize as her child is laying on the ground. This has always been really hard. Parenting has always been really hard. We are parenting in a time that no one has ever parented in before. I can't find any books on raising teenagers. I've looked in medical, lifestyle, and self-help. Try the horror section. Here's the deal. There's a reason that this is harder than it's ever been. No one has ever parented in a time so unlike the one they grew up in. It's never happened in the history of humans that you have not been able to look back at the strategies that you used, that your parents used, and apply them to what's currently happening. It's also never happened that you have had no freaking clue what it is like to grow up. It may as well be a whole different species. So when you're looking back and you're trying to kind of say, well, you know, there were people who were mean to me when I was growing up, or there was competition when I was growing up, you have no idea what it's currently like for young people. And I think that that piece is really hard for us to own and really hard for us to accept, but it's real. I think that this will be, when we look back in the future, we will see that this has been a tumultuous time to grow up. And in the long term, we will see the impact of it. There's a reason that rates of depression and rates of anxiety have risen about 20% in our young people. This is hard. We have created a beast. I will say that technology and social media have transformed the world so quickly and so profoundly that our brains, our parenting, our society have not even begun to catch up. So we're just going to talk about that a little bit. Oops, wrong way. Come on, kids. So, how to parent 2017. Make sure your children's academic, emotional, psychological, mental, spiritual, physical, nutritional, and social needs are met while being careful not to overstimulate, understimulate, improperly medicate, helicopter, or neglect them. In a screen-free, processed foods-free, GMO-free, negative energy-free, plastic-free, body-positive, social conscious, egalitarian, but also authoritative, nurturing but fostering of independence, gentle but not overly permissive, pesticide-free, 2-story, multilingual home, preferably in a cul-de-sac with a backyard, 1.5 siblings placed at least 2 years apart for proper development. And don't forget the coconut oil. How to parent literally every generation before ours. Feed them. Sometimes. The rest of the time they'll figure, it is so intense and so complicated, and every decision that you make is refuted 2 years later. You know, how many people here gave up on eating eggs? Cholesterol, all that other stuff. None of us ate eggs, and now eggs are good. Bacon is now good. Like, you should eat bacon, you should drink red wine. In 5 years, that'll all be wrong. We have a lot of science. And what we actually have learned is we know nothing. And so we're looking to experts for advice, and we're looking to our history for advice, and we're looking to one another for advice, and what we're learning is no one has any advice. And it is because we have no idea what we're doing. And that's why it's so hard, because we as parents judge ourselves ferociously. This is scary as hell. It's a scary time to raise humans. And the outcomes seem really important. We're going to talk a little bit about why it seems so competitive and why it seems so important, and yet why it is more difficult to do than ever before. Just the fact that you are here is incredibly meaningful. Can you please do me a favor and just kind of look to someone near you and thank them for being here? It's really powerful that you're here. Your very best asset in raising healthy children is a strong sense of community. The very best thing that you can do for one another is to pay attention to one another's kids. To pay attention to creating tight communities. What we know now is that kids have more Facebook friends and less, well, they don't have Facebook friends. We're on Facebook. They got the hell out of there the minute we all got there. The minute Nana was like, I saw your picture on the book of faces. All the kids were like, bye-bye. Now they're on the Snapgram and the InstaChat and all those other things, the new ones, WhatsApp and all these other things. So yeah, no one's on the Facebook anymore. But they have more virtual friends and less real-life friendships than ever before. And statistically, we know that they have less capacity. They don't know who to call on when times are bad. It's become extremely difficult for them to know how to share bad news because their entire Instagram feed is filled with only good. Your best possible look, your best possible news, your biggest accomplishment. And so they don't have that opportunity to kind of share the really bad days, the days when you don't look so good and you've got, acne and you've got this other stuff going on. You just have to go to ground. Our kids need a strong sense of community. They need to know that there are people around them who are paying attention, and they need to pay attention to one another. We actually need to drive them to spend less time studying, less time playing lacrosse and soccer and basketball and all these other things, and more time interacting in the basement or in their rooms or wherever without the social media, without those other things. They need to learn how to interact with other humans comfortably. Teenagers actually express more discomfort now at eye contact than has happened to the average teenager at any time in our past. As a matter of fact, many of them would meet the criteria for autism if we judge them purely on their comfort level conversing and making eye contact. And it's because they're not used to it. Even when they're together, what are they doing? You guys, be a group of 3 teenagers together. What are you doing? Yeah. So why is it so hard? Parenting is like looking both ways to cross the road and then getting hit by a plane. We think we're doing everything right. We feed them correctly. Kids have never eaten healthier, well, probably since the 30s or the 20s when they weren't exposed to processed foods and things like that. Then they ate healthier. Kids have never eaten healthier than they do now. We've never offered them, more well-rounded, more safely grown foods than we're offering them now. They have never had more opportunities to participate in extracurricular activities and sports and languages and all these other things. Even with the decimation of our school systems in terms of their arts curriculums and their music curriculums, they still have more opportunities to do these things. However, this screen thing that we used to be so worried about, how much Sesame Street is your 2-year-old watching? Oh my goodness, that's terrible. They can watch Sesame Street until they go blind. It's the tiny screens that are the problem. We have created, with the smartphones and the constant connection, we've created a problem for our kids that they do not know how to get themselves out of. Really, Sesame Street till you go blind. No one has ever had too much Elmo. It's not a thing. Parenting now is different. It's more intense. There is less room for error. And we're going to talk about there has never been so little room for error. For your error or for your kids. There has never been so little space for kids to screw up in our entire life. Kids cannot make a mistake. They can't mess up. They can't be kids. It lives forever. There's higher stakes in so many ways. How many people here remember going to kindergarten? What did you do in kindergarten?
Blow up letters is the best.
Blow up letters. What else? You played in kindergarten. Lots of colors, lots of painting, lots of interacting. The vast majority of you went to kindergarten for a half day. Full day kindergarten was almost unheard of. And you played. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but the average kindergarten curriculum is now what the second or third grade curriculum was 20 years ago. Our kids have not gotten any smarter. The kids now are not 2 grades smarter than they were 20 years ago. We have really high stakes. There's more scrutiny. My God, Judgy McJudgestein, we are all judging the hell out of one another. It's our favorite sport, mostly because we're afraid we're doing it wrong. So if you are doing it wrong, thank God. And there are so many choices to make. So if your kid is gluten-free and my kid is not gluten-free, it's not possible that we're both right. So you are either a crazy helicopter parent, or I am a lazy parent who can't be bothered. I mean, good God, you either nurse them till they're 9, or you wean them when they're 6 months old and they can go on to the cup. You don't do a bottle, God forbid. Ooh, bottle. Right up there with a pacifier. Ooh, Lord forbid. I lived in Africa for 2 years. I was a lay midwife in Africa, and I will tell you that they use pacifiers in Africa. It's other women's breasts, and they give them to babies because babies have a need for that, and they don't like to hear them scream. And we're all like, oh, that's a attachment technique, this, that, and the other thing. Nope, beginning of time, people have been offering babies pacifiers. They just were attached to people for a long time. I'm okay with the ma'am pacifier, not the mom. Like, you can move on from that. We need to remember that nurturing people is not the same as creating dependence. Our kids feel less safe than they've ever felt before. It is more expensive. Man, my son, so we went through 5 rounds of IVF to get pregnant with our son. So we have 1 child, and his friend has 3 siblings. And so my son was like, why isn't so-and-so going to camp? And I'm like, because so-and-so has siblings. That's what they spend their money on. They spend their money on 3 kids. We just have 1, so we can put more money into this one. It's so unbelievable. How many of you have recently written checks to summer camps? Anybody? So I wrote a check next to a woman the other day who was writing her check for summer camp, and she said, I just want you to know that I am paying for 4 weeks of summer camp what I paid for my first year of college. It's expensive to raise these humans because we feel like we can't just send them to Lord of the Flies camp, which was good enough for us. I mean, we went to summer camp on a cement playground where all of the playground instruments were made of steel that turned to molten lava in the summer. And you would go down the molten lava slide head first into the concrete, and the 5 teenagers that were in charge of you did not care. You were in no way developmentally challenged. You did not gain skills. You stayed alive. You drank bug juice, and you tried really hard not to get the crap beat out of you by the older kids on the playground. Because again, the 5 teenagers that were getting paid $2 an hour to keep you alive for the day, nobody was like, what sort of certifications do they have? And if they had positive behavior management no! That is why the camp we send them to now is $400 a week, and the camp that we used to send them to is $25 a week. Because my kid now goes to camp and learns how to do green screen animation. Or he runs an organic farm. The world has changed. And if you send your kid to Lord of the Flies camp, people are going to judge you for that. I don't even think they have them anymore. I don't think you can send your kid to Molten Lava Slide camp anymore. That makes me kind of sad. And there's less time. There was a time where, regardless of what your life choices were and things like that, you could raise a family on a single income at a very acceptable standard of living. Those of you who remember your parents, I have a dear friend whose father came here from outside the US. He was a school janitor, a school custodian. He bought a house. His wife stayed home. They raised their family. It's not possible anymore. Our standard of living versus the amount of money that it takes to keep it up has changed dramatically. There is less time. So you do not suck. It really is harder than it's ever been. And so if your grandmother or your mother is like, well, when I was raising you, I didn't do any of this, and I didn't do that, and I did whatever, you can just nod and be like, you have no freaking clue what you're talking about. Don't say that out loud, though, because they don't do well with that. Parenting wouldn't be so hard if I didn't care how my kids turned out. You care really deeply. It is, that saying that a parent is only as happy as their least happy child is real. It's incredibly painful to raise children in this hyper-competitive, hyper-stimulated, hyper-scrutiny era. Because they do get hurt more often, and they do get left behind more often and more publicly than ever before. This would not be so hard if we just didn't care how they turned out, but we do. How many of you did things in junior high and high school that would have gotten you suspended, expelled, or potentially on some sort of police list if it happened now? How many of you did things that were, if they were on social media, would make it difficult for you to do some of the things you're doing for work right now? Yeah. Guess what childhood is? It's a time of messing up. Our children's brain are actually not capable of making good decisions. When you ask a kid, why did you do that? What do they say? Because they don't. That is not like an evasive technique that they've developed. Truly, when you say, what were you thinking? And they're like, I don't know. They don't know. We're going to talk about why their poor brains don't work, but there's a reason why when we were 11, 12, 13, our lives were pretty narrow. You didn't have as much room to make these mistakes. And I don't know about you, but I certainly didn't have we would have to have the equivalent of a movie theater at our house to record some of these stupid things that we did and then put them on like an MGM theater screen. There wasn't a lot of chance that we didn't have cameras. My family had one camera and it was kept on a shelf. And on a holiday, someone would go and be like, oh, we should get the camera out. And we'd take out the camera. Everybody stand still and you'd be like, click. That was $1.25. Click, that was $1.25. That's it. If you blinked, no one's going to know what your eyes look like this year. There was none of this constant recording of every single move that you and your idiotic friends do because you're just as dumb as we were, which means if you're on the basketball court and you're all playing and you notice that so-and-so's shorts are a little bit loose, it's really funny to pull them down. But now you video it and you put it on the Facebook. And then all of a sudden you are a sex offender. We all laugh, but it's true. All of a sudden the police are at your house because your 13-year-old thought it was really funny when so-and-so got pantsed and they put it on their whatever. I'm not learning any more social media things until my son is old enough to have them, because I feel like there's going to be a different one, so I'm not learning Snapchat or Instagram or anything like that, so I'm just going to have to make it up with me. So they put it on their Snapgram account, and somebody sees it and reports it. And all of a sudden, you have a kid who could potentially have a criminal record. How many of you pantsed people when you were in junior high and high school? And people who aren't raising their hands might. Yeah, everybody. Yeah. Or did something else equally dumb. I mean, that's just what we do. Because that's part of the learning process. Here's why. So here's the problem with the teenage brain. The teenage brain was all of our brains are basically useless. They were created in caveman times. Our brains have not developed much since caveman times. And teenagers needed to leave their very small village and go out and find mates in other villages. Otherwise, all of the babies would have 3 heads. So in order to increase our genetic kind of mix, teenagers had to leave the village and go out into the woods where the likelihood that you would get eaten was very high, and go find new genetic lines to mate with. Which means you had to go out in the woods with a certain amount of, what's the worst that could happen? Teenage brains were actually created to enjoy taking risks and to do a far worse job of really thinking through the potential consequences of that risk. When they say, I don't know why I did it, and I didn't think about what was going to happen. Well, why did you do it? I don't know. It's because they don't. Because their brain has been programmed for thousands of years to take big risks without thinking about the consequences. Kids have less time in which the errors and outlooks of children are acceptable. Think about the number of kids you know who are 10 or 11 and are practicing at a junior professional level of some sport. They play it 4 times a week, they travel, they do all these other things, they get up at 5 in the morning. You know, my friends whose kids play hockey, I don't even feel bad for you. Like, if your kid plays hockey and you have to bring them to hockey practice at 4 in the morning, that's your fault. They were not born. Yeah, they were not born knowing that hockey existed. Somewhere along the way, you let them find out about hockey. That's your fault. I don't feel bad for you. But if you do that, your kid gets up at 5 in the morning, you get up at 5 in the morning, you drive and you do all these other things. They're practicing at like this pre-professional level. And then if when they're 14, they're like, hey, I don't really want to play this anymore. I want to do lacrosse. What do people say? You're too old. Everyone who's on the lacrosse team has been playing lacrosse together since they were in 6th grade, 5th grade, 4th grade, 2nd grade. Wow. That's a lot to say to a kid. 25 years ago, the average high school athlete who went on to have a scholarship level achievement in college picked up their sport in high school or junior high. Sometimes in high school, a kid would be like, hey, baseball tryouts? Ooh, she's going. I'm going to play baseball now. 4 years later, they have a baseball scholarship. That's as much thought as went into it. Now, I mean, if you didn't play pee-wee, yada, yada, you know, forget it. Not a lot of time to play around when you're a kid. And internet and social media are just nuts. It's nuts, and we have to do a lot more talking and thinking about that, unfortunately. Perhaps nowhere else do children grow up as fast as in the United States. Joan Allman, coordinator for the Alliance for Childhood, says an anecdote about a very famous cognitive psychologist. It says, He didn't particularly like speaking to American audiences. After he would finish his lecture on the natural progression of child development, someone would invariably ask, but how can we get them to do it faster? We want our kids to grow up very quickly. We make demands upon them, our schools make demands upon them, our societies make demands upon them that are really high, and instead of being amazed at the young people who can meet those goals, we are disappointed by the ones who cannot. It would be a whole different ballgame if these kids went to first grade, second grade, third grade, and we were like, wow, it's amazing that you're reading already. That's great. We don't do that. We say, wow, you're not reading. You need an IEP, you need supports, you need tutoring, you need summer school. Why are you not reading? That skill development is not normal for many first, second graders. They don't have the processes in place in their brain to be able to do those things. When you start hearing from a very early age that you are a failure, it's really funny because the math teacher, I adore my school, I adore them. But the teacher says the math groups are not higher than one another, they're just different. That is bull hockey. All the kids know, well, he's in that math group because he's really good in math, and I'm in this group because I'm not really good in math. And the teachers are like, no, you're all doing the same thing, just in a different way. Do kids know? They know. Anything that you think your kids don't know, they do know. Things that you don't know, they know. Very early on, we start differentiating between who is smart and who's not smart. When I was in first, second, third, fourth grade, that just didn't exist. You might have had a higher level reading group or a lower grading reading group, but first of all, that was not in first grade. That was in third grade or fourth grade. But there wasn't these deviations from the norm that were so incredibly spotlighted from so early on. In 1970, fewer than 15% of kindergartners attended full-day programs. In 2016, 85%, 92% in Massachusetts. What do kids do if they are not attending full-day kindergarten? Where do you think they go after that half day? Huh? They might go to daycare, but back then they went home. It was a very different world. I am a working mom. My husband works. We've worked since my son was very young. I am not saying that both parents should not work. I'm just saying that if we have changed the world from one in which 45 years ago, the vast majority of kids went to school for half a day and then went home, where there was not an academic environment, there was not a video called My Kids Can Read, there was not this, there was not that. And now 45 years later, they go to full-day kindergarten with these extraordinarily high academic expectations. We should not be surprised that the way our children experience youth has changed. In 1970, by the end of kindergarten, students should try to copy letters. So what does it mean if your kid doesn't try to copy letters? Oh well, he's an excellent finger painter and ate hardly any paste. A+. By 2015, by the end of kindergarten, students should read emergent reading texts with purpose and understanding. Our kids have not gotten smarter in 35 years. Nothing has changed in their brains. Well, something has changed in their brains. In 1970, no kids got suspended from kindergarten. There were no behavior management programs for kindergartners. We didn't have red light, blue light, all these other things. We didn't have to. because kids' developmental capacity was in line with what we were asking of them. The farther apart these two things are, the more behavioral problems you have in the school. Period. Kids do well when they can do well. As for kindergarten, it could be argued that in some ways it is the new third grade. Is there a difference between kindergartners and third graders? Holy crud. Some of our kindergartners, like, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to lie to you. Like, when my kid was in kindergarten, I was always afraid he was going to wet his pants. That could have happened and did any day. Kindergartners and third graders are completely different beasts. If we're making the same demands on our kindergartners that we used to make on our third graders, and less independent. So 1970, a child in kindergarten should be able to travel alone 4 to 8 blocks. How many of you have or have recently had a kindergartner? 8 blocks? Your 5-year-old? Are you like, see ya, good luck with that? Anybody? My kid is 10 and he goes off on his scooter on our cul-de-sac and I'm like, okay, honey, but you know, when you get... And I lived in West Africa where 5-year-olds went out after like large herds of cows with these tremendous horns for full days. I come back to my 9-year-old who in other places would be doing a full day's work and I'm like, watch out for the curb. So we do these bizarre things where I'm like, you should be able to read by the time you're in kindergarten, but when you're 12, I'm still going to be uncertain about letting you ride your bike 5 streets away. Your school is going to be afraid to let you walk home if you have to cross the street. Oh, well, you can't be a walker, you have to cross the street. Here's your European literature homework in 2nd grade. We are nuts. And then there's technology. He said technology is scary. Technology is scary. If you're not afraid, then you are not paying attention. And this is one where what your friends do and what your kids' friends do and what your kids' friends' do matters. And it is brutal. I have a 9-year-old, and some of his friends are getting phones. And I want to go to his parents' friends' houses and go, what the hell are you doing? You are destroying my life. It's a personal decision when you give your kid technology, but it impacts the entire social group. As a community in my little town, I've been pushing the wait until 8th movement. To wait until 8th grade. It's a national movement to wait until 8th grade before you give kids a smartphone. You can give them the clamshell, the phone that does nothing. You can give them, we were just talking about when you used to text people, and you'd be like, can, ABC, A, O-M-N, U. Why? Because we also didn't just do U, we actually spelled out X, Y. Remember how long it took to type out a text message? Yeah, you can give your kid one of those phones. They won't care about that. They won't text anybody. But when we start getting into the smartphone, average age of first smartphone is now 10.3. That's 5th grade. We still won't allow them to walk 8 blocks. But we will give them a phone that will allow them access to every piece of information that has ever been created in the history of mankind. There's a reason the age of average exposure to hardcore pornography is about 9. And that is not the magazine that your father used to have hidden under the bed that showed boobies. Maybe filmy underwear. This is intense stuff. I got my first cell phone at the age of 22. And it looked just like that. I tell kids, I always try and explain to them, I'm like, you don't understand. I teach CPR and AED classes, and I always pick up the AED. And I'm like, that's how big my cell phone was. So this AED used to be that huge machine the size of this thing that a doctor would push in the room and be like, clear. Now those are this big. That's the size my cell phone used to be. Now cell phones are this big. Hello? If I did this, you'd be like, ooh, look at her cell phone. None of you would be like, that's ridiculous. No cell phone could be that small. You'd be like, how do I upgrade? Seriously, that's totally believable. This is so scary. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. For those of you who are familiar. It used to start at food, shelter, warmth was the basic needs of a human to survive. But we actually recognize that first we need a battery, then we need Wi-Fi, then we will give a damn about whether we live indoors or not. Would you rather sleep in a field with Wi-Fi, in a place with frequent sightings of mountain lions and bears, or sleep indoors with no Wi-Fi? What's the temperature outside? It would take, many of our kids would, if you asked your kid at home that, how many of you know for a fact that they would choose to sleep indoors? Yeah, there's a couple people who are like, my kid really doesn't like mountain lions. But other than that, so it used to be food, shelter, warmth, security, stability, freedom from fear, friends, family, achievement, respect. The problem is that the Wi-Fi and battery took away a lot of that other stuff. Once we added in the Wi-Fi and the battery, a lot of kids really lost some of that security, stability, and freedom from fear. The friends, belonging, achievement, respect, a lot of that stuff went away for our kids. We have no idea how hard it is to be a kid today. You really have no idea how relentless it is. Now, if you were bullied 25 years ago or 30 years ago, you have no freaking clue what it's like to be bullied. You were like bullying light. Bullying now, although it's happening less often right now, we're doing a better job teaching young people compassion and things like that. It is relentless and insidious in a way that it was never before. Why is that? What? Social media. Social media. It's, yeah, man, like I would rather let my kid drive at 9. It would be safer for everybody. And my kid is going to be a terrible driver. So, like, you shouldn't think that I'm like one of those people who's like, my kid has really good, he does not. Like, there's probably going to be warning signs up. Kids are part of the larger world at an earlier age. So we're all like, when my grandmother was whatever, she was married at 15. And, my great-grandfather worked when he was 12. I recently reread the Little House on the Prairie books, which are offensive in ways that are difficult for me to articulate in many ways now that we have a better understanding of all of those things. However, Laura Ingalls, in the very first book, talks about living in the big woods, Little House in the Big Woods. It's in the early 1800s, and she lives there with Ma and Pa and Mary, that always good kind of stuck-up one. And I think the baby might have shown up by then. And she talks about them living way out in the woods, and a wagon comes by. And it's the first wagon that's ever driven by their house. And she runs out, It's the first time she's ever seen a stranger. She was 5. Our brain was created to live in very small social environments that were extremely non-complex. When I lived in Africa, I lived in a very small village about 3 days from a capital or running water or electricity or any of those other things. And having a stranger come into the village was a very big deal. And beyond where I lived, there were people who had never seen a white person, had very rarely seen strangers, and it was really an intense experience for them to meet someone who didn't know their ways. Actually, I spoke the tribal dialect. I did not speak it well, and it was incredibly hard for people to understand what I was saying because they had never heard anyone speak their language with an accent. We're actually pretty good at understanding people who speak English or other languages not as a native speaker. But imagine people who've never met anyone who has spoken their language as a second language. Their brains have very different experiences of the world. They're actually much calmer. There's much less stress, even though it was a place where the infant mortality rate was about 50% before the age of 5. There was less mental illness, less stress, less emotional upheaval on a day-to-day basis because you lived in this very small, very safe community where everybody knew everybody. The daily pattern was set to the point of ritual. So there wasn't a lot to be stressed about. There weren't a lot of big changes in what was going to happen. Now, kids meet strangers from the moment of birth. I mean, literally, you come out of the womb and there's a whole bunch of strangers. It's not the elderly woman who's lived in your neighborhood forever and delivers all the babies and all these other things. And, then they go to daycare, they go to school, they go to all these other places. They are constantly exposed to strangers. A school with 1,000 kids in it? Unheard of. A school, the average graduating classes 50 years ago were around 100 to 200 kids. There weren't a lot of massive schools. There were tiny schools. Lots of them, but very small schools. Fewer kids went all the way through high school. College, now high school is nothing. There used to be like, are you going to go to college or you're not going to go to college? Now, if you're not going into, which I will tell you, if your kid has any interest in going into the trades, you should encourage the hell out of that. Like if you have a future electrician, you should just begin your retirement now. I paid an electrician $250 the other day to be like, yep, that's not going to work anymore. Thank you. Yeah, I paid a plumber $500 to tell me that when spring comes, I'll need to pay $3,000 to get that fixed. We need the trades. If your kid doesn't want to go to college and wants to do something else, listen to them. But if they don't, they're going to have to spend a lot of time moving forward in this world, and they're going to meet strangers everywhere, and every single one of those strangers makes our brain tweak a little bit, and it's more intense. Oh, and that pornography thing. There are some really intense studies about what the ever decreasing age of exposure to pornography means for the way our kids interact sexually. Don't read them because they're horrifying. Just know that if you have the internet in your house and you do not have some serious parental locks on that stuff, bad things are happening. They are no less curious than we were. When you were a 9-year-old girl or a 9-year-old boy and you were like, I wonder what boobs are. And you'd go and you'd look under the couch and you'd look under this, you'd look under that, and you might find like an underwear magazine. Not no more. Now you type it into the internet. And even if you type it wrong, it'll still come right up. How many of us have typed things in incorrectly and been like, whoa, no, not that. That is not what I meant. I need to throw this computer away. This one is tainted now. So, I want to congratulate you on the incredible work we've done on the teen pregnancy rate. Less teens are getting pregnant now than has happened in years and years. Here's the problem. It's because they can't get pregnant through the internet. If kids could get knocked up online, the teen pregnancy rate would not go down. The teen pregnancy rate is going down because kids are not interacting with one another face to face, which makes it really hard to get pregnant. It also makes it really hard to learn how to interact with other humans face to face. Our average 17 to 18-year-olds are going out less often than 13-year-olds did as recently as 2009. 2009, explosion of various forms of social media, including Snapchat and Instagram, but I'm sure those things are in no way, shape, or form related. If this happens in your home, you have to do something to interrupt it. And that is going to be really, really hard. Like, if you can think of someone in history who has been hated, you will be hated more. There is literally no one that they will teach them about in history here in Littleton that will be hated more than the parent who says, no cell phones in my car. But after a little while, especially if you can get together with your kids' friends' parents and say, we have to do something. We have to take back Saturdays. We have to take back the car. We have to take back something. If all of you do it, they will accept it eventually and things will change. I have watched dramatic things happen. So my dear friend who has 2 boys, and her boys are 13 and 14 now, all their friends are also teenage boys who have spent years like this. And the 5 families, which sounds like a mob thing, like a mafia thing, but it wasn't a mafia thing at all. The 5 families got together and said, we are not going to allow kids to do this at our house. They're 13 and 14. They can't go anywhere else. And so they put a basket by the door. That's what the kids actually started doing things. They pulled out, this sounds ridiculous, they pulled out Legos. And then they built a game around the Lego figures. Then they found out about Dungeons and Dragons. They started doing Dungeons and Dragons. And my friend, who's probably 45 or 46, was like, it's amazing that I am celebrating that my son is spending all of his time doing something that made my mother cry. Because she thought I was going to be the biggest loser that ever walked the earth, because me and my friends all sat downstairs playing Dungeons and Dragons. And now we are like, thank you, Jesus, they're downstairs playing Dungeons and Dragons. They're going to be billionaires. The world has changed. Bullying. How many of you are worried about bullying? If you're not, you will be. Bullying has always existed. It has existed since the very beginning of time, when Og told Bog that Bog was an idiot because he couldn't throw the stick as far. We've had it forever. It's a way of showing dominance. In crowd, out crowd, all these other things. But there was just an extraordinary article written that talked about why bullying now is so incredibly torturous. It's from the Wait Until 8th blog. Again, Wait Until 8th. It says, back then, kid comes in, they're feeling kind of out of sorts. They go in the cafeteria. There's a slippery spot in the cafeteria. They slip. They spill their tomato soup all over them. Bunch of kids at a table over there laugh at him. Goes into gym class, changes his clothes. Those kids tell all the other kids, like, oh, so-and-so fell down and spilled tomato soup on himself. And everybody else is like, well, that's kind of, I guess that's funny. I guess he had to be there, whatever. Kid goes home, kind of forgets about it, lets it go. hangs out with some friends. They play Dungeons and Dragons or whatever. By Monday, it's over. We don't have very long memory, our kids. So by Monday, he goes back in. Nobody remembers the tomato soup. He might pick up tomato soup. Somebody will be like, don't spill it. And he'll be like, ha, ha, ha. And there you go. Now, this kid is kind of feeling out of sorts, goes into the cafeteria, and we have a kid that we will call Bully. Bully started out by posting pictures of his RV race cars, his radio-controlled race cars on Snapchat, and people would be like, that's cool, and he'd get a like. He'd get a like, and his brain would go, ping, that felt good. But after a little while, people weren't that interested in the RV cars, and then he posted a video of one of his RV cars getting run over by a truck, and people loved it. They're like, that's so cool. Oh my God, put that big one out there. See what happens when a truck does this. See what happens when a train does this. And he started getting likes. Boing, 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 boing. And he felt good. Because literally a like is, I like you. And we like that. It's nice when people tell you they like you, isn't it? Anybody like that feeling? I hope you all do, because it's kind of hardwired into us from the beginning of time. So, he has learned over time that when he posts funny things online, people like it. And he gets that little, ooh, that feels good. So he notices that people are slipping in this water. And he says, oh my God, this could be the perfect moment. And so he sets up his little iPhone and he waits. And the kid goes and gets his stuff and he slips and the tomato soup falls all over him and those kids kind of laugh, but Bully posts it up on the internet. And within 2 minutes, kids all over the cafeteria are laughing. And they're not laughing to be mean. They're laughing because it's kind of funny when people fall down. We like slapstick as a society. And then he goes off and he changes his clothes and he comes out in his gym clothes, and as he's walking by he notices a girl goes, ch-. And then 2 seconds later, posted on Instagram is, hey, tomato soup boy changed his pants. And it gets shared and it gets shared, and by the time he gets home in the afternoon, it's everywhere. Everyone in his school has seen it. People he doesn't know have seen it. They've shared it out. People are like, what an idiot, what a doofus. He should never show his face in school again. What a clumsy jerk. And he's reading all this, and he can't help himself. He has to go back and check. He has to go back and check. He has to go back and check. So all weekend long, he's watching this. And he's getting this constant barrage of all these really intensely negative chemicals and hormones. And then his parents say, what's wrong with you? And he's like, nothing. And they say, you know what? You don't get to speak to me like that. It's inappropriate. I'm the grown-up and you're the kid. Go back to your room. Goes to his room, watches a few more things of the game. Maybe you say of the fall, maybe you say no more videos, whatever. Maybe he says, listen, I fell down and I spilled tomato soup on myself and people are laughing at me. And what do we say? What? It's not a big deal. Happens to everybody. I fell down and spilled tomato soup on myself. You're making a big deal out of nothing. This is all going to be gone by Monday. We don't understand the incredibly powerful effect that every single viewing of that video has on his brain. Now the bully, who if you were this kid's parent and you did see this video and you did see all these things that said idiot, doofus, all these other things, you would want to string the bully up. As parents, we go marching into you and we say, what are you going to do to this kid? He should be expelled. He should be suspended. This is a terrible kid. He's going to jail anyway. Because it feels so vicious. As an adult, we understand the impact and all these other things that happen, and so we want that kid strung up by his toenails. We fail to recognize that many times kids who bully do so not because of what it does to you, but because what you do for him, what the people around do for him. We have, there are really good programs for bullying that work on developing compassion, understanding impact, being able to kind of put yourself in other people's places, which teenagers are historically not good at, taking other people's perspective. Well, how would you feel if you were him? I don't know, I'm not him. That is literally what you will hear from a lot of, I don't know, I'm not him. Right? They can't even figure it out. But bullying lasts, well, it stays online for everything stays online forever now. Nothing can be erased. Even Snapchat, that's supposed to be disappeared immediately, doesn't disappear immediately. And here's the problem. What time is it? Okay. Here's the problem. When I was growing up, 500 years ago, evidently, I had a dear friend whose dad was a police officer. And he was batshit crazy. In retrospect, that man should not have been hosting slumber parties or anything. He was a single dad, very intense, and he went to bed at like 8 at night because he worked like some ridiculous shift from like 3 in the morning to whatever. And so at 8 at night, he would go around, he'd look around and be like, all right, if you're in this house now, you're staying here for the night or you're leaving. Which one are you doing? If you're leaving, get the hell out. If you're staying, call your parents. We'd all call our parents because nobody wanted to leave. So we'd all call our parents, and then he would take the phone off the wall and take it in his room with him. And that was the only phone in the house. It had a 900-foot-long cord, the one that spiraled up and turned into a ball of cord this big. You'd spend your Saturdays trying to undo it. And we'd be like, but what if there's an emergency? And he'd be like, if there's an emergency, I'm a cop. You should come knock on the door. If the emergency involves me, go find somebody else. Who are you going to call? And you know what happened after that? All sorts of fun stuff. Because guess what could no longer impact you? What could no longer impact you? Anybody from outside of you and your 3 ridiculous friends. So we'd be 14 years old in funny costumes and outfits, singing along with the radio, doing all this. Because what's the other thing that we did not have? A camera. No one was taking pictures. No one had to worry that they were going to take a bad picture of them or take a video and post it up on the internet. You could just be a kid and be completely safe for hours on end, entire weekends. And nobody would ever know what you did for the weekend. And if you posted, now if you post nothing on social media, people ask you what's wrong. I have a friend whose daughter says if I don't post on social media, people assume that I have a zit on my face. If you don't post, you're dead. And the other problem is, so I do trauma response. And we had a young person who died by suicide, and I was in the school afterwards, and I said, how did you find out that this happened? It happened over a weekend. And they said, well, I was on my Snapchat at 2 in the morning, and I saw a post that said, rest in peace. There's so many things wrong with that. But I said, wow, that's interesting. Would you mind, why were you on your Snapchat at 2 in the morning? And they said, I check it all night, every hour or so, because then if someone posts something of you that's ugly or mean or whatever, you can make them take it down before too many people see it in the morning. What that does to the brain, every time that young person is waking up, they are afraid that somebody might have posted something bad. So they have all the adrenaline and cortisol coursing through their bloodstream. Now they may see that everything's fine, or they might find out that a friend has died. When I said, hey, when you saw that, did you go wake your parent? No. Well, why not? What do they say? I don't know. Because their brains don't work. Many of them dealt with that information on their own for about 15 hours. That was when the school put out an email. And I get it, the school needs to check sources and do all that other stuff. That's when parents found out. And so one girl said, it was so weird. My mom came into my room at like 3 PM and she was like, oh honey, I'm so sorry, I have to tell you something. And I was like, oh, what? And she said, so-and-so died. And she said, like, I didn't say it to my mom, but I was like, yeah, I've known about that forever. Like, not like I'm not over it, but I mean, social media has changed everything. And we have got to be really aggressive. Those of you who think my kid can handle it, I don't think you're right. Especially if they're not 14, 15, 16. Even then, they're not allowed to drive for a reason. Like, we've done the science. We have to pay attention because this social media stuff is dangerous as hell. And we have to be aggressive because the problem is that if you trust your kid to do well with it, then when do you find out they're not doing well with it? When all hell breaks loose. What?
Just the reality is different. Like,
Yeah.
sometimes on social media, it's not live.
It's not live, it's not real. Reality is so skewed. What you're supposed to look like. Look at how we're dressing our kids. I tell you now, I look at 12 and 13-year-olds and I think I have never looked that put together in my entire life up until now. When I was 13, all right, 8:04, whatever, I have until 9. When I was 13, my favorite outfit was hot pink parachute pants, a hot pink and white striped shirt, and a hot pink vest. And I had black shoes with a kitten heel this big that were patent leather, and I wore 900 jelly bracelets. And I did my hair, I hung my head upside down, and I sprayed it with hairspray, and then I blew it dry so it stuck up straight. I was hideous. There was no age in the future that's going to look back and be like, that was a good look. Our kids now look like fashion models. And their clothing costs as much as fashion models, and they spend as much time photographing it as fashion models. I mean, I went through basically everything up until now as a glamour don't. I tell people, like, your clothing should make a statement. My clothing says I'm not naked. It's a weird world our kids are in. So what does this all mean? What is like the upswing? What do we need to do? The first thing is intentional communication. You know, we recently had an issue in my neighborhood, and a lot of people, it happened with teenagers, and a lot of people were like, well, I just sat down and talked to my 8-year-old, and he's horrified that people would do that. If you taught it to your 8-year-old, your 13-year-old does not know it. Things that you teach your 8-year-old do not stick. You're not done with that. Well, I taught you empathy at 8. I'm good now. I mean, holy crap, somebody taught me how to use PowerPoint, how to put GIFs in. I forgot. You don't teach something once and then move on. I mean, who here teaches math? Anybody here teach math? Like, you gotta repeat that crap over and over again. And now I look at my kids' math and I'm like, well, sorry, you're in fractions now. That's where mommy got lost. We have to be intentional about our communication, which means that, you know, I actually write in my Outlook calendar, talk about empathy. Watch that video on the kid who has autism. Kids are coming into contact with more kids who are different from them. We do mainstreaming now. You know, when you were in school, well, maybe some of you look like you're 12, but I don't know. When some of us were in school, when I was in school, kids with Down syndrome, kids with other things were not in the same classes. It was a much less progressive, much less great time, I think. We are in a wonderful time in education. But it does mean that we have to do more work with our kids earlier on to teach them how to be respectful towards differences. And that has to be intentional, especially if you do not live in a community where they are confronted with difference all the time. I was really lucky. I raised my son for his first almost 6 years in Jamaica Plain in Massachusetts, which is one of the most socioeconomically, racially, gender, sexual orientation, you pick it, one of the most diverse places that you could possibly raise a child. I was really lucky. Like, my kid, by the time he was 5, knew that, you know, at one point he was like, he said something about like this Lego man that he loved, and I was like, oh, if you love him so much, you should marry him. And he was like, I can't marry him. And I was like, oh, don't you think that boys can marry boys? And he was like, boys can marry boys, Mommy, but humans can't marry Lego figures. And I was like, oh, okay, like it's good, you know where that is. Very early age, boys can marry boys, girls can marry girls, all these other things are fine, people of all different colors. I was really lucky. If you have not raised your child in an environment where they are constantly confronted with difference, it is your job to make sure that when they are confronted with difference, they are not startled. We do not do well as humans when we are startled. Deep education on empathy that continues throughout childhood and adolescence, bystander education. Not just, hey, you would not do that, would you? I don't give a damn if your kid wouldn't do it. I do give a damn if your kid wouldn't do it, but I care about what they would do if they see someone else do it. If you see this on the internet, what would you do? It's not just about what they would do. Forced engagement. You gotta make them interact with one another now. I mean, it used to be that nothing would make me happier than having 2 of my friends over and being left in the basement for like a full day. You know, when you were 14 and you could spend the whole weekend down with your friend, especially if you had like games down there or a pool table or something else, like your mom would open the door to the basement and throw 2 bags of chips down there and shut it again like she was feeding the velociraptors in Jurassic Park. And you would, at no point were you like, hey, we're bored. Like, you would just figure it out. Like, you might watch TV. Again, I pretty much at this point think your kid could watch as much TV as they want. I've given up on that whole screen time thing. Like, if it's not the screen that has the bad things on it, like, let them watch Rocky Horror Picture Show or all those other things for the rest of their life. I give up on that. Phone drop off. I will have this. I will also have the best food and the most, you know, access to Netflix and Amazon and Hulu and whatever, and a pool table and a foosball table. I want the kids at my house without the damn phones. You're going to have to work with the people your kids hang out with to figure out a way to make this acceptable. It's sort of unfair to expect teens to have adult-level organizational skills or decision-making before their brains are finished being built. So many of us think that the teenage brain is either a bigger kid brain or a smaller adult brain. The teenage brain is its own separate animal.
One of the most rewarding experiences for me has been to study brain science and apply it to the experience of parenting. And the hand model of the brain that I use to teach parents is very useful to understand that. So if you take your thumb and put it in the middle of your palm, put your fingers over the top, this is a very useful model of the brain. And when we can actually see in front of us what's going on in the brain, then we can change what the brain does. So let me walk you through very basically what happens in this brain and the structures in it. And it goes like this. The spinal cord comes up, representing the wrist, and then you have coming up into the skull the brain stem and the limbic area, which work together to help regulate arousal and your emotions and the way you have a fight, flight, freeze response. These are below the cortex, the limbic and brainstem areas, and the cortex is this higher part of the brain that allows us to perceive the outside world, to think and reason. And this frontmost part of the brain, right behind your forehead, so the person's oriented like this, is actually the part that regulates the subcortical, limbic, and brainstem areas. This regulation is very important because sometimes we can have all sorts of things happen in our life. We're tired, we're exhausted, someone pushes a particular emotional button, and we can flip our lids. So rather than being tuned in and connected and balanced and flexible, we can lose all of that flexibility, even lose moral reasoning, and act in ways that are terrifying to others, including our children. Now, you can actually bring yourself back online and come back to the high road and make a repair with your child, and that's important to explain it to them. And you can also use this hand model of the brain to explain to children, even as young as 5 and 6, how to understand when their emotions are rising up from the brainstem and limbic areas here, and how it's overriding the prefrontal area and making it so they may be about to flip their lids. So I've had kids come tell me that they're about to go flip their lids and they need a break. They need a timeout. And by even just naming that, they can tame it.
All right, so that is Dan Siegel. Basically, any book he's ever written, you should read. I am somewhat obsessed with him. If he were ever to disappear, you should not look at my house. He will not be reading me everything he's ever written. This is, for me, one of the most transformational ways that we can think about interacting with other humans. Because here's the problem. We look at this, and we pretend that most of the people we interact with are like this. They are completely tuned in, and they're in control, and all the information is coming in and making it through this amygdala and stuff without stopping and getting to that thinking brain, that prefrontal cortex. The fact of the matter is that most of us go through life like this. You're a little stressed out, you're a little overwhelmed, you got stuff to do, things are going on, people aren't listening. You're here. Teenagers go through life right about here. It's not because they're bad or they're thoughtless or all these other things. This thing happens during the teenage years called neural pruning. It's why it's so lovely to be with your 8 and 9 and 10-year-olds. And then they turn 12 and 13 and you think, who the hell is this person? And what did you do with that lovely 9-year-old that was like, you know, you do so much and I love you so much, Mommy. You should take a break. And then your 13-year-old's like, so? Don't talk to me. It's not because they're bad. They actually, something called neural pruning means that the 9-year-old's brain looks all over the place and the 13-year-old's brain has far less connections. They've gotten rid of all the childhood connections to make room to make the adult connections. So you can actually tell there's less stuff going on. And there's a lot more emotion, intensity, hormonal stuff being carried on less wires that are not very well insulated, because the other thing is that the insulation on the brain happens. So you basically have 900 things plugged into an extension cord that you got at the Dollar Tree on sale for 50% off after Christmas. And when you plugged it into the wall, it sparked, but you were like, oh, this will be fine. So it's already like right at the cusp, like every time you unplug something, it goes zzz, and you're like, it'll be fine. That's a teenager, basically. Every time something gets plugged in, plugged out. And eventually, for every teenager, it bursts into flames. It's really hard to be a teenager. They produce 2 to 5, so cortisol and adrenaline are kind of those main chemicals that we produce when we're angry, our fight, flight, freeze kicks in. They produce 2 to 5 times as much as an adult. So when you are angry, they are super angry. and it takes at least twice as long for them to clear it out. Which means that you go downstairs and you eat a pint of Ben & Jerry's. You're like, okay, I'm going to go upstairs and talk it out. And you go upstairs and you're like, knock, knock, knock. And they're like, get away from my door. And you are like, I am sorry. I came up here and I was ready to talk to you. And if you're going to speak to me that way, give me your phone. Give me your this. Give me your that. This is unacceptable. You are a child. And you go stomping downstairs and you eat another pint of Ben & Jerry's. And you think your child is being so disrespectful and so rude and so thoughtless. And you wonder what the hell you did wrong. No, the chemicals and hormones that were racing through there are still there. You cleared yours out because you had a lot less. And it took you a lot less time. So when you're calm, you should wait like another as long as it took you to get calm before you go upstairs and try to deal with it. Because the problem is, this is disastrous for our kids. Bad things happen. They make really bad choices. And later on, you're like, why did you do that? And they're like, I don't know. This plus this, if you go like this and they go like this, nothing good ever happens. You cannot scare a teenager into obeying. Remember, they were meant to go out into the woods and find new mates, even though the last 3 people that went got eaten. That's not going to happen to me. How many times have you heard a teenager say, well, that's not going to happen to me? Joe was on his trampoline and he broke his leg. Well, that's not going to happen to me. Hey, Mom, I was on the trampoline. And they were preconditioned by thousands of years to be able to do that. And we are also preconditioned to do this. You know, the problem is that our brains were also created. The adult brain was created thousands of years ago, and it was created at a time when, you know, there was a caveman, and his name might have been Bog. And Bog's whole goal in life is to stay alive long enough to procreate and then go die at the ripe old age of 17. So Bog goes out and he's like hunter-gatherer, hunter-gatherer, hunter. Ooh, noise in bush. Very scary noise. I will go back to the village. And he ran back to the village and he lived. Now, we don't know. There might have been another caveman named Og. Who knows? And he might have been like, oh man, I had a great night's sleep. I hung out by that new fire stuff. I think that's going to stick. That fire stuff is good. I'm going to go get some food. Oh, there's a noise in a bush. Now that could be something that might eat me, but it could also be something furry that I could domesticate and sleep near, allowing us to live in colder conditions. I'm going to go look. So he goes and looks and roar! Bog got eaten. He's dead. He did not pass on his genetic code. Our genetic code came from Og, who heard a noise in a bush, peed himself, and ran back to the village. That's what we have. We have a fight, flight, freeze that does not go, I wonder what this noise is, but goes, emergency, something bad is happening. This is not a useful way for your brain to be, and we do it sometimes. You know, I don't know about you, but every once in a while I will be in an argument with someone, and I'm in an argument, and I hear from the very back of my head a little voice that going, shut up. Stop talking right now. Do not say anything else. That is your prefrontal cortex trying desperately to get your amygdala back under control. But your amygdala is like, hell no, I got this. I'm going to burn this village to the ground. And then 2 days later, when everyone's calm, you have to be like, hey, I'm really sorry for what I said when I was like this, and they won't know what that means. They'll think you're flashing gang signs. As parents, we have got to take care of ourselves. You cannot go through life like this and be able to react appropriately when your kid does the stupid stuff that they're going to do, which they are going to do. They're going to do dumb stuff. The amygdala is constantly asking, oops, wrong way, sorry. One question, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? That's the amygdala. It's, do I need to run away? For kids who are on social media all the time, what do you think the answer to that question is? Do they feel safe? If information gets stuck there at am I safe, it doesn't make it further. The next piece is, am I cared for? Am I loved? Do people around me want me to be happy, want me to be healthy? A lot of our kids have people around them, for whatever reason, that are so competitive. You know, we were talking at dinner this evening about how hard it seems to be for kids to rejoice in the victories of others. We have taught them that success is a pie. And if your friend gets a piece, that's one less piece for you. I can't hope that you do well if I think that you doing well means that I don't get to do well. It's really hard for kids who don't trust one another to admit when they are vulnerable, when they are nervous, when they are afraid, and get the support they need from one another, and trust that they won't post on social media, ooh, so-and-so's freaking out, good luck today. Only when we get past am I safe and am I cared for do we get to what do I think about this. If you have a young person who does not feel safe, they can't do this, which is where the prefrontal cortex, the decision-making part of their brain kicks in. We have got to find ways to reestablish safety for our kids. They need long periods of time where they're just hanging out, not interacting on social media. I mean, writing stupid stupid poetry, you know, listening to music that means something to them. I mean, remember how hard it was to record a song? Like, if you really loved a song, you would sit by the radio and you would have a tape deck. I recently found a tape deck and I gave it to my son, and it was like watching a gorilla play with a computer. Like, he's like, oh, what is this? I don't understand. Like, boom, boom. Like, he had no idea. And then the thing popped over and he was like, woo, what do you do with that? What comes out? And I was like, nothing comes out. You put things... You earned that song, and then you made a mixtape. If you really liked a friend or something like that, you made them a mixtape, which took like 22 hours. You would spend 22 hours in your room recording like off of the radio, and like all of them started like 4 words in. You never knew the first 4 words to any song. Who knows what the first 4 words of this? It wasn't stressful. You weren't worried. You were just focused on doing something that was entirely contained. And during that time, your brain was just like this. Oh man, there were only like 22 songs at that point in the world. Like, if you didn't get it, like, it would be on again in like 12 minutes. Like, that's what the rotation was. We as parents need to gauge the amount of time that our kids spend like this. Completely calm, completely relaxed. And if we can't see them spending that time, we need to figure out how to build it in for them. Because this is the teenage brain. My friend called me not that long ago and she said, you need to tell me about that brain thing again, because I'm going to kill Eric when he gets home. I'm a foster parent. Like, I was like, I'm on for the hotline. Like, I don't want Eric, so please don't do anything to him. Like, I said, what happened? And I live in New Hampshire now where everything is legal. And so he had gone with friends and they had gotten fireworks. He's like 16 and taken his friend's mom's car, his friend's 17 or whatever, and that they were coming home and there's one firework that had not gone off. So he's in the back seat and he has this firework and he decides to light it. And thank God it wasn't a big one. He just burnt the entire roof of his friend's mom's car off, basically. And so his mom, he called and he was like, here's what happened. And his mom said, why did you do that? And what did he say? I don't know. Well, what did you think was going to happen? I don't know. Well, what if it had gone off? I didn't think it would go off. Well, then why did you light it? I don't know. It's this. But here's the problem. We have such high expectations of our teenagers. What did you think was going to happen when you posted that video? How did you think that person was going to feel? They don't know. And they don't know because not because they're bad people, not because they're belligerent, and not because they're malicious, because their brains haven't caught up to the situations that we put them in. Because 100 years ago, they wouldn't meet a new person to make fun of and bully. The bullying kind of stayed within the family. You bullied people you were related to, and then they bullied the next one. It was a whole different ballgame. We got to figure out how to do this because 20% more of our kids have anxiety. And that's what anxiety is. It's this. We really got to think about. And we got to stop assuming that our kids are like this. This is bull. They're never like this. You should be first establishing safety all the time. The authentic feeling you have in the presence of a person with whom your body senses is safe. That used to be kids' friends. I mean, I had best friends when I was growing up who I could look any way, go any way, whatever. I'd be like, oh, look at that. Is that a pimple? Is that this? And a lot of our kids don't have that anymore. What are you going to do? The way we handle an escalation is part of how people determine that they feel safe. How many of you have ever had an argument with someone? You know you're going to have the argument, and you practice it on the way. They're going to say this, and I'm going to say this, and then this is going to happen. And we practice the whole argument because we know, because we've had this argument before. You've had these arguments with your kids. I'm going to say, why didn't you do your homework? And they're going to say, well, I thought I had more time. And I'm going to say, well, when we have a predetermined pattern that we think someone is going to follow, one of the most effective things we can do is to stop following the pattern. To refuse to escalate. Our kids are constantly walking around with these beautiful engraved invitations that say, would you like to come to an argument? And we're like, hell yeah, I want to come to an argument. Can I bring a covered dish? Will there be parking? Is there anything gluten-free there? We can be like, you know what? I don't want to go to an argument. I'm going to stay right here. I'm going to recognize that you are like this. And guess what? It feels terrible to be like this. You need to stay here. Part of how we do that is by remembering that it's not about you. Your kids actually don't give a damn about you. They do. They adore you, but their responses are not about you. They're about them. It's coming from inside, not outside. Step back and go, wow, it's really hard right now. You're really angry about this. It feels really unfair. So I had a mom that I was working with around communication. She and her 16-year-old daughter were having brutal communication stuff going on, very patterned. And her daughter had been great in school, and then she started not doing well in math, so her answer to not doing well in math was to stop going to math. which makes total sense because we avoid feeling uncomfortable. She felt uncomfortable in math, and in order to avoid discomfort, if you sat in a fire and felt uncomfortable, you would stop sitting in the fire. It's how we're hardwired. So she stopped going to that place that made her feel so bad about herself. Unfortunately, it was math. So she had to go to summer school. And so one day, we had worked a lot on these communications. Like one day her daughter came stomping down the stairs and her mother was like, "What's the matter?" And she goes, "It's just stupid that I have to go to summer school and everyone else gets to go to the beach." And what did the mom want to say? If you had gone to math class, then you wouldn't be going to summer school. You'd be going. Here's the deal. She knows that. You know, we were taught to do these you need to point out the natural consequences of their actions. There has never been a time in history when a mom has said, "Well, if you had gone to math class, then you'd be going to the beach," and the daughter's gone, "Really? I had no idea those two things were connected. You mean, if I had gone to math class, I would not be going to summer school, and I could go to the beach? Thank you, Mommy." What the hell is wrong with us? We think we're like pointing that out. It'll be like, "Well, if you had worn a coat, you wouldn't be cold right now." Oh, wise guru. It's not our fault. Somebody wrote that in a book and we all read it and we were like, "That sounds smart. We should do that. Natural consequences. I believe in that." So instead of doing what her daughter expected her to do, which was to say, "If you had gone to math class," she said, "It really sucks that everyone else is doing something fun and you have to do something you hate." And her daughter started crying. And she came down the stairs and she said, "I'm so mad at myself, Mommy. I'm so mad at myself that I didn't go to math. I should have just gone to math. I don't know why I did it. And I'm so mad because I'm wasting this whole summer and everyone else is doing awesome stuff. And I'm not even part of everybody's friendships anymore and everything else." Now, they're not like walking together through lily fields right now holding hands. That did not last forever. But it was a moment of real connection that came from her mother refusing to say, "Hell yes, I want to go to an argument." And reflecting back that sorrow and that anger is real. We need to step back more and think to ourselves, how would I feel if I were this person? And because you're a grown-up, you should not be like, "Well, I don't know, I'm not him." Putting yourself in that place and then responding as you would want to be responded to, because we have all messed up. Please don't throw Elmo into the fire. Diffuse before you go like this. If you go like this with them, you are part of the problem because you are adding fuel to the fire. If you know anyone, some of us may have colleagues or relatives who are very, very calm all the time, it is impossible to argue with them because they won't escalate. They won't do it with you. You want to be like, "Come on, bring it out." And they're like, "You're really upset right now. Like, it makes sense that you'd be angry about this." And you're like, "What the heck are you talking about?" Refuse to escalate because it doesn't fix anything. You cannot frighten them into collaborating with you. You know, we say like, "Well, my mother drew the line and she did this and she did that." Well, you know what? Life was a hell of a lot less complicated then. Remember average kids? Like 50 years ago, people were average. Like you got through high school and you got decent grades and you might have been on a varsity team, but you were not like the masterful all-star. And then you went to, maybe community college. Like we were just talking, everybody went to the state school. Like some people might apply to a school far away, but they were like, "Ooh, fancy pants." Everybody else was like, "Hey, we've been friends for like 5 years. Let's room together at University of New Hampshire, UConn, because that's where we're all going. That's where everybody went." Life was easier. I hate to break it to you. It wasn't as hard as it is now. There is a practice called active listening, which is about kind of having neutral body technique, paraphrasing back a little bit, what you're saying, these other things, summarizing, listening for feelings. But really, it's about not throwing Elmo into the fire. You can Google active listening. It is not rocket science. The rocket science piece is not doing this. We respond to stupid things, like they say the F word, and we're like, don't use that language, and then we concentrate on that instead of everything else that happened. I probably can't, because I swear like a sailor. I like doing trainings for police officers, because then I can say whatever I want, and they actually teach me new things. But we react to the wrong part of the content. We react to how it's said, not as what is being said. We can't hear beyond our response to tone. It's not respectful the way you're speaking to me right now, but they're talking to you and you need to listen. First, allow them to feel safe. Second, allow them to be heard. I cannot tell you how many times I have talked to kids who have said, my parents won't listen. Because we think we already know. Don't tell me. Don't tell me about this. Don't tell me that you had a heart. Don't tell me all these other things. I don't want to hear it. We have to listen. And that takes this. This is not about you. It's not about you. It's about them. And if we could spend more time stepping back. So I am a Buddhist. I used to practice a different religion called anxiety. I was the high priestess of the religion. Decided to change that. But there's a Buddhist practice that when you look upon something that is intense or upsetting, you say to yourself, isn't that interesting? Isn't it interesting that this is happening? And I am also a mom who occasionally completely loses her mind. I am a 9-year-old who evidently, when I say we are leaving right now, thinks it's a good time to get in a sleeping bag and turn on a show about the refurbishment of a cruise ship. Literally, yesterday, like, we need to leave right now, and I come in and he is in a sleeping bag. And he's like, but they're refurbishing the Pride of Bruges. And I'm like, what are you doing? We have to leave! And then you're running out and you're driving down the road, your purse is on the top, like we all get there. It's very hard. We need to care less about whether our children are academically gifted and care more about whether they sit with the lonely kid in the cafeteria, because when you create an environment in which kids feel safe, they will learn better. Being academically gifted and sitting with the lonely kid in the cafeteria are not, they're not mutually exclusive. But if we create a space in which your kid feels safe, and your kid feels safe, and your kid feels safe, and your kid feels safe, they go like this, and they can learn. I wish I could estimate the amount of time that teachers spend trying to beat information into kids' heads when they are like this. And there is no connection to the prefrontal cortex. How many times when you have been very upset with your child and you have said, you need to do this, 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 and then they go away and you come back and you're like, did you do that? And they're like, you didn't tell me to do that. And you want to be like, are you freaking kidding me? In the back of your head is like, don't yell. And the front of you is like, yell. They honestly don't hear you because all they hear is anger, 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 cortisol, adrenaline, fire, fire, everything's bad. And this was actually meant for when you were about to be eaten. So you're yelling at your kid about homework and they are releasing all the same chemicals and hormones that would have been released if you had loosed a mountain lion and covered them in meat. They start to pull away from their core. They don't kind of have as much blood supply in their fingers and things like that, so when their fingers get ripped off by the mountain lion, they won't bleed as much. Same chemical thing. It's why all of our kids have stomach issues all the time now. When your gut is constantly being bombarded with cortisol and adrenaline, it does not do a good job digesting. That's why they don't sleep. All-time low for teenagers. Like, your kids need to sleep. I adore this practice. It is a Japanese practice that says that when something has been broken and repaired, it can be more beautiful than the original object. When we go like this with our kids, the way that we repair this can strengthen our relationship. What a powerful thing to do this and go back to your child and be like, I'm really sorry I lost it this morning. It was not appropriate. I got really upset because, I get worried when you don't get your homework done, and I know there's going to be consequences for that and all these other things, but in reality, me yelling at you was not appropriate. And I apologize. And you don't do that and then look at your kid like, what would you like to say to me? You have to give it as a gift. And it can actually create a stronger relationship in a better place. So if you have not done this in the past and you want to start now, it's not too late. The way that you repair those relationships can be incredibly powerful. Don't be so hard on yourself. The mom in E.T. had an alien living in her house for days and she never even noticed. This is really hard work. The fact, as I said, that you're here and you're thinking about it is incredibly powerful. If you take nothing else from it than the ability to, when you are confronted with a moment when you are seriously questioning what the heck is going on with this person in front of you, you can stay like this, you will have gone a long way towards raising a child who has the better ability to do this for themselves, which allows them to do it for the people around them. I'm incredibly grateful to you for being here, for sharing some time with me. I'm around if people have questions, but if not, then thank you so much and have a good night. You are free to go.